Hello everyone, I'm Pearl Pereira, and I want to share with you the other three birds that were in the Into the Woods block number 1, Songbirds. So there were some little important parts to making those, and I thought it'd be nice to have all 4 birds shown in these videos. So let's get to work and start making your birds. Hi, we're back in my sewing room, and I'm at my table, and I am going to start by working on the goldfinch. The hardest part is number 51. It sits on top of 50. It's very small, and I just applied some fray block to this little corner here, and that little concave, and I'm going to hit it with the iron. And then we can start. Now, this is the hardest part, and it is the smallest piece. And I have trimmed my seam allowances to about a scant 1/8 of an inch. And that hopefully will be easy enough to do. I know it's a little harder when it gets small like this. But this is where all these little techniques will help you. Now, I have my brush here, and anytime you're working all the way around a shape, never start at a mountain or valley. You want to start in the center of your longest, straightest edge, which for me is this edge right here. And I should have clipped this, but I better clip it now. Okay, one step ahead of myself. Okay, in this small little area here, I'm going to clip down the center, once to the right and once to the left. Now try not to touch your paper. And then there's a little concave here. I put 2 little clips in that one. So as I was saying, you always want to start ironing in the center of your longest, straightest edge. So that is over here when you're going all the way around something. Now I applied my starch. The best iron for this shape is the Cool tool. The one with the spade foot on here, and I'm just going to come around here and just start pulling in my seam allowance. Now sometimes I pull with my stiletto, and sometimes I pull with the tip of the iron. And that's one of the reasons why I enjoy using this iron so much. It just helps you get these shapes the way you want them. So I can bring up over that last part of that tip, and I'm going to do that little tiny concave by just pushing the fabric up over the edge, and then we'll start around that next small little mountain that we're going to go over, and then I need to put more starch now. Now I try not to put more than 1 inch of starch when I'm working on most things. Now this is quite small, so I'm just doing the area just ahead of myself. And the reason for trying to not get your template wet so far ahead of yourself is that your template will start to get soft. So only working a 1/2 inch to 1 inch in front of yourself, that'll keep your template nice and firm. Now I'm going to come in here, and I removed the pin, and the reason I removed the pin is that I want to be able to spin the template and my body actually, so that I can go all the way around that concave. The idea is to turn that seam allowance. What do we have there? Have a thread? Yes. Turn that seam allowance in one motion so that you are not fraying the fabric. Okay, let's go back in there. There was a little thread that was hanging out there, and it was making me crazy, so I moved it. Okay, so now we have this in here. Now I filmed this whole segment already once, and I had to do it all over again because I kept getting my bangs in the way. I have trying a new setup for the camera, which I like, but then I had the camera too close to my head, and you could see my hair. It looked like a big spider on the upper edge of the screen. So we don't want that. So I'm filming it all over again. And hopefully this time I won't get my head in the way. So now you can see I'm just continuing to go around there. Now I really do like to, when they're small, have the pin in there, because then I don't have to worry about holding it down, because it's in the place where I need it to be. I just have to worry about being able to see over that pin, and then, oops, and then I can just spin my template around and continue ironing. It's a very, very small shape, but they do have that distinctive black mark on the top of their head. Okay, let's see what I did. I can see that I need a little bit more starch right here because it's not laying down, and it takes longer to make something that's small than, of course, it does to make something that's 10 times bigger than it, because you just have to take your time when you're making these small pieces. Now, this one has little fuzzy little threads that are hanging out there, and they'll make me crazy. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to come with my basting glue, and I'm going to put a little dab of that basting glue on those threads that are sticking out there. If I can get a little dab on there, there we go. And then I'll just pull that thread in, and then I won't have to worry about it when I'm trying to stitch and move it over with my needle. Okay, so now this piece is done, and of course now you need to take out the template, which is always a miracle when it comes out, and all the seam allowances stay nice and flat. And generally they usually do, but you usually have to come back in, and then I just hit them with iron to make sure that they're flat and everything is all dry and just the way it's supposed to be. So you can see that number 50 is the body, and number 51 is this marking on his head, which goes right there. And when you look at the body shape, you can see that the head curves around here and it curves around underneath here. And I started to prep this halfway, so you don't have to watch me prep the whole thing every time. But you can see as I approach this part of his head where it curves in, what I'm going to do when I'm ironing this is I'm ironing my seam allowance just like I normally would. But I get to the end right there where the end of the template is. I just want to make sure that the seam allowance out here really curves like if it was making a circle around here. So I'm continuing to bring in that seam allowance on that edge so that when I place this, you won't be able to see any of that yellow poking out, depending on how large I made my seam allowance. So now we're going to iron this other section. Let the iron do the work for you. You can see it is really easy and smooth with this little tiny iron. Now, I know some of my students, they don't spend enough time on there, so they'll leave this standing up, but then they come right back with their larger iron, and then they will make sure that the seam allowance is dry. So now you can see what I meant about bringing all of these seam allowances in so that we know that it's going to hide underneath our black shape. So I can come over here, and the black piece is right here. So on this one, how I would put this one together, I would find the position where my highest number goes, because when I put this in here, I could not see where I was really going to be placing this, because I know that a tip of that yellow is going to stick out, and we'll trim that off when we're done, but we just want to get this in the right position. Okay, so I think I know where I'm going. Now, right now, I can go ahead and clip off that little piece. Take out the template. Anytime I take out a template, I will hit it with the iron and make sure my seam allowances are flat. And now I can go back to positioning my pieces. So I'm just going to put a couple of, let me get his tail in here so that we know we have all his body parts in the right place. And I still see a little tiny place right there. Now I'm going to come with my base stick glue, and I need to make sure I always have my hands in the screen. Okay, and I am going to, because I can see where that rounded part goes, and I know that this just fits right on the edge. And if you have a problem with a seam allowance not wanting to tuck under, you can just hit it with the iron, and then you can even actually put a little basting glue underneath there if you wanted to. But there was enough still on there that it was done. So basically that is the hardest part of this one. Now when I would be building this one, I would have truly started with the highest number on this bird. I would be 87, 86, 85, and make my wing, set it aside. And then I would come over here and make my body. And then I would put my wing back on my pattern, and I'd just be able to slide this into position, and I would have everything in the perfect placement. Okay, the next bird is the oriole. This is the one where I keep calling it another name. Now, the oriole has the highest numbers are, of course, in the wing. You could make that one first. And then you're going to make your head. And then you would work on your body. Now, I have the pieces for my wing not prepped yet because I'm just making this sample. And what you can see is what I didn't take into account was that right here, underneath 31 and 32, basically, just a slight bit of 31, this seam allowance needs to be pressed out flat, and I pressed the whole thing. So anytime that happens, this is why I like having my pattern handy, having it right here where I'm working, because then I can look at it, you know, when I'm making all these individual motifs, I can see what I'm doing. So right now I'm just ironing that section out flat because we know that the wing is going to sit on top of that. And you don't want to have two pieces where both seam allowances are ironed, because if you do, then you'll sometimes end up with gaps like there is in my fingers when you would put those two pieces together. So you always need to have one end that is flat and the other edge that has a folded seam allowance. So the part about this guy is pretty much the same process as we did with the other one, except for I'm doing variations of my multiple unit template. So I'm just looking underneath here to make sure I have the head in the right place. And once I know that I have my placement for all of my pieces, then what I can do is I will find that pin that I'm trying to chase around there. I put 2 pins in there. And the reason I put 2 is because now I know that my template is not going to swivel and get out of position. And I have not ironed the seam allowance on the black one. And that's because I want to iron the orange and the black at the same time so I can get that perfect placement. Now I'm looking underneath here. I know it's hard to see, but I am looking underneath here to see where my template goes, because then I know I have my, there we go. Ah, there we are. I'm going to have everything in the correct position. I need another couple of pins because I don't want this one to move also. And I don't want it to move because now I want to put the basting glue on the head. So I'm coming over here to the head and I'm testing my glue to see how it's coming out. And then I want, you know, the faster you move, the smaller the little dots of glue will get. So that's something to think about when you're putting, when you're gluing. Now I just need to make sure, did I not? Well, maybe I didn't. Maybe I moved too fast there. But now I've got it ironed together. And then the next step that you're going to do on the Oriole, have to think about that every time, is now we want to iron. Now you're looking at your pattern and you can say, okay, I don't need to iron this edge of my bird. Okay, so I don't need to iron that seam allowance, but I do need to iron everything else. Now make sure your template is ironed down, and I'd come in here and I would trim away some of my excess seam allowance because in some places it was a little bit large. Over here where the two pieces overlap, you know that you have your black is already glued down to the orange seam allowance. So to keep this intersection less bulky, I can trim off the excess fabric because I can't trim past the glue line. So it just lets me be able to trim that fabric. Now, okay, so everything is good right there. And then we're going to come along with our clipping. Now, this is a very long concave, so I'm going to clip about every 1/8 of an inch. And the secret to clipping is to keep your clips the thickness of your stiletto away from the paper. Now, that's a lot bigger than 2 to 3 threads, and 2 to 3 threads is what most books will tell you to do. And the reason to not do the 2 to 3 threads is that if you do 2 to 3 threads and you put your pieces together, then what happens is you fold it and it's going around there and it spreads. You'll end up having a raw edge on the edge of your piece because your fabric will have frayed all the way back to your template. So that's something to keep in mind when you are clipping. Now I didn't, oh I didn't. Now this is a very long concave and you can see I clipped quite a few times. This is a smaller one, and I do know that I want to follow the contour of the shape a little bit more in there. That'll make it flow easier when I'm turning this. So I'm going to come along here, and my rule of thumb is for concaves is a minimum of 2, but usually 3, almost all the time on small ones. So you have to think about it. You're making a cut where it's coming off a straightaway, so you'd have a cut here, and then you'd make your clips in here, and then you would make one last one before it starts to go straight again. Of course, every concave looks different. Now, I'm right-handed, so I want to start on the right and I want to work to the left, and that's if you have the iron in your right hand and you sew with your right hand. If you are a left-handed sewer and you use the stiletto in your left hand because you didn't have to train yourself how to use your left hand because you're right-handed, so you would stop before you got to a sharp point, and then you would iron that next section and then come back and do this section here. Now this is not a sharp point, but it's still a place where I can tell you how to deal with that. So you'd stop here, you'd stop back here, and a left-handed person would iron this first, and then they'd come back and iron this other edge. And that's so that the excess fabric on a shape will be in the right direction for you when you stitch. So this doesn't really have that. It's not a true right angle, so you can't really see that process, but I think you'll be able to see it when I'm doing the cardinal. So I am just going through here, and I'm just coming up in here, and we went around there. And I do want to have a little bit more starch on this because we have double fabric over here. And I'm going to come over here, lift this up over the edge, and just let the iron do the work for you. You know, don't push so hard that you are crumpling your edge of your template. I mean, you can feel the template quite easily. It really is a nice soft touch when you're working on something like this. You can switch to a larger iron. I have a tendency to do that, and I tell you not to do more than 1 inch at a time with your starch, but I'm doing it a little bit more right now because I don't want to make this too long of a video, and then I can get to a point where I can switch again. Now, I always have at least minimum of 3 irons out here. But see the nice transition from one to the other? If you just iron this one, and then you want to place this one on top, then you have to deal with this tiny, bulky seam allowances from the orange and how to get rid of that. So this just makes a nice, smooth transition from one fabric to the other. So we'll continue this guy, and then this part of this one will be ready. And like I said, I would not usually put that starch all over there, but I can tell you I can iron pretty darn fast because I've been doing this a long time. I get up to this tip. I do take my time on that little tip because I want to make sure that I get everything ironed exactly the way it's supposed to be. And then I hit this right here. Make sure everything's ironed nice and flat. I think one of the things you'll also notice is that where I'm not ironing, I always give those shapes a much larger seam allowance. And the reason for that is, I'm just cutting off that little shape right. The reason for that is maybe when I was making my wing, maybe I don't get my wing cut it out too small or something, and I might end up, you know, having a gap. Well, if you have a bigger piece of seam allowance on the underpiece, you always know that you're going to be able to get your piece in there, and you won't have any problems with maybe the top piece being too short. So, oh, I do want to tell you something else about this. You may have noticed that there was a hole in the bird, and if you're using the cutting machine to cut these out, it's going to cut that hole out for you. And what that is that's to help you with the placement of your, now this is a little bit more difficult when you're pulling this guy out because that little shape in there doesn't really want to come out. And I will open my seam allowance back up because that black was underneath it, and I'd like that to be just the way it's supposed to be. I hit this with the iron. Now my piece is flat. Now you see there's an eye on here. Well, you can take this and you can go back to your finished piece. And if you wanted to use the ultra suede, and I have one here cut out somewhere. If I wanted to use the ultra suede, now this little eye is like a 32nd, but you see I can get it in the exact place it's supposed to be. Proportionally on his head, it's supposed to be there. I looked at many photos and saw where it's supposed to be placed. But let's say you don't want to use the ultra suede. Maybe you want to use embroidery satin stitch in there. And what I did, I was playing with my hole punches, but they're not hole punches, they're hollow punches. They look like this. They have a hole in them. And you need a hammer and you go and a cutting mat. And then what I did is I put a piece of tape on here, and then I got on my mat and I pounded this 3-4 times, and I punched out the hole. And the reason I want this hole in here is because, and that's the right size. I punched out a couple of them because I couldn't remember the exact place where it was supposed to be. Oh, the other thing is I should have done that, and I didn't, well, I want to do it on this side. I want to mark where the head is supposed to go so I can get that placement in there. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to now mark this. But what I did is I put the blue tape on a piece of freezer paper so it doesn't lose its stickiness. And then before I do anything else, I'm just going to come over here. And I could have cut this when the freezer paper was in there. It might have been a little bit easier. But all I want to do is find a registration mark. So now what I can do is I can put this in here. Put this in here. And now when I do my embroidery, I leave the tape on here. And I stitch right inside that circle. And I can get really nice finished edges on my satin stitch because I can't stitch past. I have to stitch right there and right there. So I find that I get a much nicer circle when I do this. But if you were going to be doing the ultra suede, you could glue it on here, and it's so small I probably lost it already. So that's the trick for the blue tape on the Oriole. Alrighty. Oh, there it is. There's my little eye. Okay. Now, you can glue those down with a basting glue, and then I do stitch those down with at least, that one's really small, so probably like 4 stitches when I'm stitching it, with a matching thread to the for the orange fabric. Okay, now we're on to the cardinal. The cardinal is probably the easiest bird in this whole block, so I try to vary that kind of thing. You know, within the blocks, I know I put hard things in there, but then I have to have something that's easy myself. So, oh, got tape all over everything. Alrighty. Hopefully I haven't been getting my head in the filming here. So what I have here is you have a deep concave, and anytime you have a deep concave like that, so it's deep like this, I will cut down the center, then I cut to the left and the right and the left and the right. And when I'm doing that, I am also thinking about keeping my clips the thickness of my stiletto away from the paper. So when you cut for a while, you might want to just make cuts like this one. I mean, you really don't need to do it here, but I would say, okay, that's how far, and then I'd look at it and I'd say, you know, I do that a couple times until I get the real idea of how far that needs to be away. Now, the other thing about clipping like this is that generally, when you might normally clip twice, you need to clip 3 times. And you're clipping 3 times so that if you clip twice, 1, 2, you know, it'll spread. But when you clip 3 times, like 3 times like my fingers, now these pieces will really curve into the shape that you're trying to turn. So I'm going to come over here to this one, and I want to have a better shape following seam allowance in there. So I'm just going to come over here and I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's basically here where it's on a straightaway, there where it's on a straightaway, and then the other 2 clips are in the deepest part of the concave. Now on this one, I go straight down the center, stop about 1/8 of an inch away from this part of the template here. Then I'm going to turn my scissor to the right and the left and cut. And these cuts, you are a little bit closer than the thickness of your stiletto. You're more like the 2 to 3 threads away, because basically you're taking no fabric and trying to iron it out into a much larger area. Now, if I can find my red pen, the area that I don't need to iron on this one is this area here. So I hate that when I am ironing something and I iron stuff and then I have to uniron it because I wasn't paying attention. Now on this one, yes, I think that's it. Yes. So I'm just making sure of where not to iron. Okay, so we're going to start with the hardest part of this one, which is this curve in here. And, oh, there it is right in front of me. Okay, now this is one of the places where the cone tip is perfect because you will be able to get in there and turn that easily with the cone tip. Because it's wider than the one that was on the cardinal. I mean, the one that was on, oh my goodness, that's cardinal, the other one, goldfinch. Goodness, I tell you, these guys made me crazy with their names. Okay, so now I love the cone tip. Now I'm just going to come up here underneath here with my cone tip, and I'm going to just roll it around until I have a nice curve in there. And then I can come back and I can get the next seam allowance damp, and I can finish ironing off this one. Make sure that I have the starch on there long enough, the iron on the starch long enough for it to dry. That is the most important part about working with the starch, is that you need to get it to dry. Your seam allowance should be flat to your paper. And I'm not sure how this will look if I get even closer, but we'll see if it stays in. But what you can see here is on this curve here, you can see everywhere that I clipped, and you can see that it's intact on the edge where you would be sewing. But I really needed those 4 clips in there to get that fabric to evenly distribute around that fullness. Now these, you'll practically won't even see where that fabric distributes. Sometimes you can actually see it, but most of the time you can't. So what's going to happen now is I'm going to do another variation of my multiple unit, and I'm going to take out the red here where I've ironed it, and I am going to place my template in here. Now I know the edges that I don't iron on my black, and I'm going to take it off of here. And what I really want to do is I want to make one template out of this. Now sometimes you'll find in my patterns where I have, actually the easier way for me to do this is to place this one down first, and how, come on. I pulled the whole thing out. I'm going to place this here. Then I'm going to come back and I'm going to align my template on top of the other one. And you have excess on the black one, because when I make those templates, I also, people who do fusible, I add a scant 1/8 of an inch to the underlying templates so that they can still be able to use the PDF patterns. Now basically what I'm doing right here is I just want to iron and I'm going to take out one so I can swivel this around, and there. I just wanted, really what I want here is I want the 2 templates to be stuck to each other. So to make sure that my black fabric template is stuck, I'm going to hit it from the back so that I know it's in place. And now that it is in place, oh, you moved. Why did you do that? Well, I have to do it again. I guess I didn't put enough heat on it. Okay. And those things happen, right? They happen to all of us. Okay, I've got this tilted. I have it in the correct position. And I'm going to iron you. Are you ironed or not? Okay, let's try it one last time. The other thing is that, like I started to say, sometimes I will give you a whole template of a bird, and other times I don't. I just seem to, it just depends on the shape and how easy, or really, if it's really hard, then you'll know, you'll see in my patterns, there'll be a big box around it and it'll say mutt. And you will see that you need to, now what I'm looking for here is my seam allowance placement. I know I have plenty of fabric because look, it goes all the way back to behind his opening there. So I'm going to hit this, and now this is just one template. So when I do give you pieces, you'll see this will be a whole piece, and then maybe there's 3 or 4 pieces. They'll be off to the side. It'll have a dashed line around it in my pattern, and it'll say mutt, and then it'll also refer you to my book on how to do this type of applique. But now you can see I'm basically working with one solid shape. And all I'm going to do now is I'm going to come in here, and if there's anything that needs fray block. Now fray block, you want to use as little as possible. You just want it to hold those fibers together. You don't want it running to the other side of your fabric. I just want to make sure that everything is not going to fray. This also helps hold those seam allowance fibers together when you're prepping. So now we have this. I'm going to hit this with the iron, and now I can clip. Now this is a batik fabric, so don't really need to have, you know, I can have the scant 1/8 of an inch seam allowance around here. So I'm not doing anything here. We didn't do anything there with the black. We just inserted it. I'm going to come down to this one. Now, you know, your clips vary with your shape. So one, 2, 3. Yeah, I did end up doing this, but it's just at a wider angle. And then I'm going to come over here to this, and I want to have 3. One where it's going to straight in 1, 2, 3, and 4. I did 4. 1, 2, 3. And I think 3 is good on that one. And over here, we definitely want 1, 2, 3, and 4. 1 before, 1 after, and 2 in the middle, I guess is how I should say that. Now, anytime you have a shape, right-handed person, we need to be ironing from our right to our left. If you're a left-handed ironer and you stitch with your left hand, you always want to start on the left side. So when you have an area that you don't need to iron, that automatically tells you where you need to start. Okay, so there's my brush, and I'm going to start over here. Now, this has a sharp point, and this is where I was talking about. So for a right-handed stitcher, you want to start ironing on the right side, and then in this concave here, well, it's not concave, it's kind of an angle. I'm going to iron this side of the bird first, okay? And then, if I were a left-handed sewer, you would need to iron this one first. And the reason is that when I fold this seam allowance over, it'll be going on the correct side for me to sew as a right-handed stitcher. Same thing happens if we did it in the opposite direction. If we were folding this one last, it would be prepped for a left-handed stitcher. Now, when I'm working with anything that's got a really sharp point on it, this is what I do. I want to find where that exact point is, because I want to make the sharpest points you've ever seen. So I'm just coming with my stiletto, and I'm dragging it, and I'm pushing, and what you can see is it makes a crease, and it wants to fold exactly there, and I can know I have my shape made exactly the way my template is. Now, this is the one time that I do not starch first. Usually we starch first, then we turn. When you're working on points, you score it, you fold it, and then you starch it. Because if we didn't, we would get it damp with our starch and our crease would fall out and we wouldn't have that perfect placement that we were looking for. Okay, and we're going to hit this with iron. Now that has some heavy seam allowances there, and when you come up to these intersections where you have two fabrics that are meeting each other, you want to make sure that at this intersection you pull the top fabric, in this case the red fabric. You want to, ooh, did I get my head in there? I hope not. You want to have this pulled nice and tight so that it's nice and snug to your template. Now we're going to turn. Now I wonder why I did that. Okay. One of these days I'll figure out this camera. Probably not today. Okay, so I have that done, and now this is not a true right angle on this, so it doesn't really apply as it did here. And I'll show you what this looks like for a right-handed stitcher as soon as I get this done. Now we're at another one of those intersections, and I like to be right on top of that intersection when I get that intersection damp, so that my glue doesn't come undone also, and that way we know that we can get that pulled nice and tight, and we can just continue ironing around here. Make sure that's nice and snug. Now look, I'll turn it over, I'll check these seams to make sure I have them exactly the way I want, and they look just fine. So let's just go ahead and finish this guy off quickly with the larger iron. Now you can use any size iron. Before I even had all these little tiny irons, I was using a little travel iron, but I always looked for one with a really sharp point on the end of it, and most of them don't have a really sharp point, but you look for one that has the sharpest point you can get. Now this iron, they don't make it anymore. They do sell it on Amazon, but it's coming from Japan. Okay, so what you can see now is we have our little intersection right here. It was supposed to be black. Everything lines up. And now you can see if I was sewing, and I'm a right-handed sewer, I sew like this, and I sew up to this tip, and then I turn around here, and then I have to deal with this flag. Now I'm going to do a separate video on how to deal with sharp points, and then you would continue sewing all the way around your piece. But that is prepped for a right-handed stitcher. So now you can see why if I was sewing with my left hand, I need that flag on the second side. Because when you do get up to this point, we're going to have to clip this, and we're going to have to tuck it and roll it under so that we end up with our little tiny nice sharp point. So that's how you make the cardinal, the oriole, and the goldfinch. Anyway, I hope this helps you. The other thing I want to tell you is that I'm making these shapes, so I've decided that I wanted to do this when I got older. I always said I was going to do this when I got older, but I figure I'm already old now, so I might as well start doing this. So I want to take shapes that I make when I'm demoing. I want to make probably a 4 or 5 inch block. This happens to be a 6.5 inch square, and I haven't decided on the total size yet. And I'm just going to make a scrap quilt that has many different elements from all of my quilts in them. So this is the beginning of that quilt. You can see that I always cut my blocks out with a pinking rotary blade because they fray less when you're handling them. And if they're going to be in and out of boxes for years, then I know that I want to make sure that they are not going to fray back, so that I can't even cut out my correct size I want. I actually also always cut out any of my blocks 1 inch larger than they need to be. So if it's a 12.5 inch size that you're supposed to have for your block, I cut it out at 13.5. And the reason that I do that is that when you stitch, your stitching draws in, and sometimes it'll draw in because you have heavy stitching in here, not so heavy over here, and now your block is not square. Well, once you iron this down and flatten it all out after you've stitched everything, you can now still square it up to the size you need because you have cut your block larger than it needs to be. So that's just an extra tip for today. So I hope this is helpful. Thank you for watching, and keep stitching.